What's better than a trio for the Just Start the Conversation podcast? I would say a quartet. What's going on? It is Crockett here with the Just Start the Conversation podcast, brought to you by our friends at St. Luke's University Health Network. As always, joined by the wonderful Jody McCloud Missmer and Amie Alanson Dundon. My friends, how are we today?
Good morning.
Good morning, Crockett. Doing well. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you. And I know we have got a fourth member of the band with us today, which will really help fill out the sound, I think. We've been missing a little bass, and she's going to bring it along with her. This is Maria Wood. She's the Assistant Vice President of Organizational Development and a bass player, apparently, and HR at St. Luke's. Maria, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me, Crockett.
Very excited to have you join us today. We had our little pregame conversation, and it feels like everybody's in a good headspace right now, feeling loosey-goosey for a Monday, which is a good way to be about a podcast. Everybody's just ready to go, relaxed, ready to rock. And as always, our topic, we always kind of start footloose and fancy-free, but we really try to zone in on our serious topics here. And resiliency is the conversation today that we're going to be discussing. And there are certainly points in our life where we are going to face adversity, certain life events in particular that could lead to that adversity. So Maria, as the guest with us today, I'm going to go ahead and start with you and just try to get you to give me a little bit of a definition of what resiliency is and where we might see it or use it in our lives.
Yeah, so I would definitely say in the simplest of forms, it's your ability to bounce back. So when you are faced with a challenge, when something unexpected happens, what you do next is I'll call it litmus piece of resiliency. For some of us, we start to think all the worst case scenarios, while others start to think of all the possibilities. And the resilient folks are the latter. They're really digging in deep, they're trusting their instincts, and they're just simply moving forward.
Jody and Amie, I'm going to come to you because I feel like where maybe this topic could start with a little bit of a resiliency. I think one of the things we're going to focus on is a lot of probably particular life events that could cause you to have to go through some adversity. But just the general idea of a person that, as themselves in their own personality, before a major form of adversity hits, that perhaps says the cup is half full or the cup is half empty. How much would you say that kind of before perhaps a big event hits that kind of can rock a boat a little bit, how much do you think that just kind of mental mindset can play into how you go about resiliency? Jody, I'm going to go ahead and start with you on this one.
Yeah, I would actually take it one step further and say that whether or not it's mindset, I would think experience would play a role in that whether or not there is a plan for or a preparation for resiliency. I think in any case we've talked about, someone who has a more positive outlook probably is poised better for success. But I think resiliency is a little bit different, because I think you might have an individual who is, it's interesting because when I think of you, Maria, it's a lot of times we're talking about resiliency in the workplace, and that's kind of what I think of. When I think of resiliency in our conversations, Amie, I think very much about individuals who have experienced an event and have demonstrated resilience. And so it's tough, I think, to answer that question, Crockett, but I would say that in most situations, a cup is half full or a positive mindset sets you up for success. I don't know that it necessarily sets you up to be resilient.
I think you're right. I think if we go back in time, the term resiliency was coined in the 50s, and it was coined for kiddos. And in terms of our youngest humans and how's their ability to bounce back from illness or adversity, and it was really a term that came for kids, and we've kind of now morphed it more into an adult workplace kind of topic, kind of thing. But I think the whole glass half empty or half full, we're not born with that, right? It's environmental. We are a product of our circumstances.
Yeah, it's an experiential learning opportunity.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, which then I think it's so interesting if we bring it into the workforce, it's a melting pot of employees, right, who all come from different backgrounds, who all have cups that are filled at different levels, that have different trauma that they're bringing to the table. And I think there's a whole lot of factors that play into whether our cup is half empty or half full. And there's also, legitimate mental health concerns that also contribute to how resilient we are. I've used the term in some prior podcasts. How are we at coping ahead, right? How am I at looking down, the path at what's coming and setting myself up to succeed? Am I coping ahead? And I think in large part, resiliency really is about our ability to cope ahead.
Yeah. I think the equalizer in this too is emotional intelligence, your ability to know yourself, to know your runway when something's coming, how you manage those emotions, how you interact with others when they're in the grip, and really de-escalating. So I think in my experiences, that's been a key factor for resilience. If you're an emotionally intelligent individual, you are able to realistically look at the situation and bounce back a little easier because you know yourself and you have a vision of what's going to be your next step.
It's interesting, though, because, Amie, you had said that resiliency was tied to children. And I think if anyone knows less about knowing their runway, it's children. So it's interesting that it almost seems like it's morphed a little bit in its application to adults, because I was just watching a meme or a reel, whatever you call them. And it was these two little boys in an outfield baseball game in Florida. And these two boys appeared to be brothers, and the little one was, a half the size of the other. And they're fighting in the outfield of this game. Meanwhile, the game is going on. It's a semi-professional game. And the baseball commentators start commentating on it. And you started to think, like, these kids are simply behaving in their own environment. They don't know a runway, I guess, to my example. They weren't thinking ahead about what could happen if, I don't know, the one throws his crock out onto the field, which is what happened, and it was really cute. But it's interesting that as adults, I get the impression from hearing both of you share the resilient component, it is and can be different depending upon your age and maybe the environment. Like I think of getting knocked down, like you'd mentioned, like getting knocked down and getting back up. I think about athletes, I think about that. But when you talk about a workplace level of resilience, I think you start to walk a fine line of how much do you take in your workplace and continue to get back up.
Well, that's a good point. So Maria and I did during COVID, during the pandemic. We had we work for a major university health network, so lots of frontline workers, and then all of the employees that support those frontline workers and that take care of patients. And I think one of the things that we really did learn during that time of extreme adversity was that, to your point, if we can kind of talk about when we're in the grip and what puts us in the grip, and when we're not at the top of our game with our own emotional intelligence, how that really does affect not only us, but our performance at work, the people that are working with us, our ability to not take stuff home with us. It really does start with the individual in terms of, how well do I know myself in times of extreme stress.
Okay, I can't be the only one. What's the grip?
Oh.
When you say you're in the Crockett, sorry if you know and I'm offending you by my lack of knowledge, but when you say you're in the grip, what do you mean? Yeah,
it's the swirl of everything that could possibly go wrong, right? When you think about, the events that you're like, this could never happen, and it happens, and then something else piles on top of it, and then something, and it's compressed.
Okay.
And it's, you just can't form a clear thought, and
I was going to say, or a sentence.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And, what Amie's referencing when we were back in the pandemic, it was really tough conversations because, speaking of compressed, you have a situation where, we have our frontline workers dealing in a pandemic with these uncharted situations, And then they're going home and their families are there and they're out of sorts and also in uncharted situations. So where's the relief? Where is that, decompression time? And those conversations we had were really, I think, helpful for everyone, including ourselves. Like it was almost like a tribe of folks that got together, and we spent 45 minutes with an opening of wellness, and then we just talked through whatever was top of mind and closed with wellness. And the feedback was that it was super helpful to compartmentalize, but also to not feel alone in that situation.
And so that's how we built resilience.
I was just going to ask,
Right.
okay, so how does that come in then? What is resilience? How do I know if someone's resilient in the grip, out of the grip? What does that look like?
I can look different for everybody, right?
Yeah.
You probably know my in the grip. I know you're in the grip now. We've worked together long enough. We know when we're off. We know when each other are off. We know when there's a lot going down. But
It's rare. It's very
very
rare.
rare. I mean, we are
Hardly ever
solid.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hence why I didn't know what the grip was.
Yes.
Kidding.
So I work with a lot of leaders, and that's not the case.
Maria just called us out.
Yeah. So these two are exceptions to the rule.
No, and lying.
These two are liars.
Liars.
Yeah. Our leaders are, it's funny. The grip happens unexpectedly.
Sure.
And life is unexpected. So, when it comes to the grip and how do you know, some people are really good at masquerading, right? They're very focused on the goal. They can downplay their emotions and bottle it up. But eventually that does surface. We see that happening in explosive behaviors. When you think about your communication affect, it's your tone and your body language that is over 90% of that affect. So often those people that are using their words to communicate something, you can hear the tone getting more bold or direct, or the body language, arms folded. Those things are their giveaways. So
And sometimes it's even the tone of an email.
absolutely,
Right?
absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Wait 24 hours. Put it in the
Listen,
draft.
I'm not answering her for 24 hours.
There you go.
But
Smart move.
So it's really about it's about how well can I catch myself before I get into the grip.
Yep.
Is really the thing. Am I really being honest with myself about how I'm doing in all those areas of my life? And if I see somebody I love or somebody that I work with or a fellow leader spiraling down, am I comfortable enough to say, hey, you all right? You okay? You need anything? Because I'm noticing, that's how we help each other get through it. It's not about avoiding the grip, because we're human. You can't avoid it.
No. In fact, you need to get in it and sit there with it for a minute or two and realize, and that's getting stabilization, right? Here's the situation. The reality is here. Take some breaths. Think about what that next move is. That's where it goes back to that EQ space. That's your self-awareness and your self-management. Your self-awareness is realizing, oh gosh, my heart's racing. I feel my face getting warm. I'm starting to, raise my shoulders or grip my hands. Self-management is, what do I do next? There's people in the room watching me. Do I want to be the person who's visibly losing control, sending them spiraling? Or do I want to take that additional breath and think of my next move and make it something of a leader move? And anybody's a leader, not with direct reports, right?
Right. And if we think about it and we go back to kiddos and how we start to teach resilience, we think about kids now and the world they're exposed to with artificial intelligence. And let's take sports, right? We used to play a sport, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. Now it's you play one year round and you better be an expert at it if you want to get into college. All right. And if they try out for this tryout team and this travel team and this elite team, and every time they get cut, right, that puts them in the grip, right? So we are as a species, we are putting our children in the grip all the time, a whole lot more than it's different than they used to be, right?
Yeah.
When I was little, we would go outside and play until the street light came on, and
You had street lights?
Well, no, we didn't. But I was just metaphorically.
Amie had street lights.
No, we would just have a mom screaming from somebody's back porch.
There you go.
We had a cowbell
Cowbells.
growing up.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was, did I climb high enough in the tree?
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question then, because which creates a more resilient person? Is it the freedom to act in an environment where you respond to a light coming on or a cowbell or whatever it may be? Or is it, do we have more resilience? Are we seeing more resiliency now with the descriptor of the scheduled child, and I understand, I already know what Amy's going to say. You know what she's going to say, Crockett?
What?
It depends. It depends because everyone is different. That's what she's going to say.
All right, well, we got it figured out.
Yeah,
That's
we're
the
done.
last question
Okay,
we need.
bye.
For today. Good
Peace
for
out
you
on
all.
this one.
Done.
No, but I'm saying, is there any information that, as a therapist, you've been able to glean as a professional that you see a differentiation in the resiliency? And it may be that you work with adults who were free-range child. I was a free-range child. Is there something that indicates the resiliency of that individual based upon those experiences?
The answer that pops right into my head is socialization. And I'm not really sure why I'm going to say that, but
Yeah.
I think I'm thinking it's the ability to connect with other people.
Okay.
I think is what really sets us. So we could have all these different backgrounds. It could be a child that's a free range. That's your
You never
term.
heard that?
You said that earlier, and I was going to be like, what are we, chickens?
Chickens.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, free-range, pasture-raised, free-range
know.
child.
Untethered.
Untethered.
Oh, untethered.
Untethered.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
That's a better one, yeah.
So we could have our untethered children. We could have our children that are tethered to computers and gaming and coding and all of the amazing things that world
And
offers.
sports.
Right? And sports. I think the common denominator for resilience is how are we connecting with other people, and do we have meaningful, intelligent connections with others? Doesn't always have to
Okay.
be in person. I know very resilient people who spent their lives at this point now, especially with COVID and then the world that changed, on communicating virtually,
Right.
and they're some of the most resilient people I know. But what did they do? They made sure they connected meaningfully with other human beings every day. I think that's what I see from a therapist
That
perspective.
was a really good answer. That's not what I expected. But
It depends. She expected it depends. I'm just saying.
I'm just trying to be unpredictable and throw her off, Crockett.
There you go. That's what this show is all about.
So
Unpredictability.
true. No, I love that because one of the things as we were prepping for today was what I was surprised to see is that resilience often requires support. And I would often think resilience meant I got this, right? Like, no, I'm very resilient. But the reality is when I was looking things up, a lot of it talked about support and finding individuals who can help you walk that walk. And so it's interesting that you said socialization. And I'm wondering, I want to go back to you, Maria, for a little bit, because at work, sometimes it's hard for a leader or it's hard for an employee to show that vulnerability because maybe they think it might be viewed as I don't know what I'm doing if I'm seeking out help. So, but what we're learning is that resilience requires that. It requires that social interaction, it requires that piece. So, what do you think of when you might have an employee who says, I don't want people to know that I don't know?
Yeah, it happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
So what happens? You have an employee that doesn't know, and they don't say anything, and they go down that path of not knowing, and it's often, I don't want to use the word disastrous, but it rarely ends well, right? So that's a really important lesson to leaders, parents, anybody, right? Talk to the people that you work with. Get to know where they're at. I often tell leaders when you're going towards a task or a goal or assigning work to someone, ask them if they've ever done it before. That's step one. And if they have, talk to me about your process. I'd love to hear it. And if they've got it, give them free rein to go after that task. If they haven't, talk to them about the steps, but chunk it out in smaller bites, right? Step one, why don't you do this? And then check in with me in a couple days. Let me know how it's going. Because, as a new person, someone new to a task or a goal, we have all this great energy. We're super engaged, but we don't know the environment yet. We may not know what's specifically involved. And so being able to break a task down into smaller steps gives them confidence and competence, and they grow in that. So it eliminates that, not having that conversation and just seeing what happens, which is a very risky thing.
So it's really the responsibility of the person setting those standards to check in with that person. So I think about it when it comes to children in school. I think sometimes we feel that, and we've talked about this with regard to the expectations we have of children. It's almost, it's not fair to expect a 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old to be able to express where their gaps are. That's not fair, right?
Right.
Like there are 30, 40, 50-year-olds who don't always recognize that. So it's interesting. I think, my opinion, I think we expect a lot of, I'm even going to say 25-year-olds. I think we expect a lot of individuals, and we don't take that approach. You described it in a work environment, but the reality is just simply getting on the school bus, picking your seat, and getting into your classroom. If a child's never done that before.
Well, and let's be honest, I've been a therapist for many, many years. I've worked for St. Luke's for many, many years, and there are days when I'm like, I've never done that, but I don't know what they're asking. I don't know what she's asking me to do, but I've never done this before. But
maybe on videotape's not the first place to do that, but go ahead, continue, please.
No, I'm just, in general, we could be 50 and have not known how to do a task, but I'll be darned, to your point earlier, if I'm going to tell somebody I don't know how to do that, I'll figure it out. I'm thinking that makes me more resilient, when in fact, that's just putting me further into the grip. Right.
That was my question. Okay, so that makes sense. Yeah, because I think people see that as, no, I'm tough, like I'm resilient, but in reality, you're creating more pressure, more tension.
Yeah, and I think as a rule, folks are sometimes often afraid to go to their one-up and say, I don't know how to do that. I've never seen that before. Maybe I did that 8 years ago. I don't have the slightest recollection how to do that, but they're not going to say that. And then that flows down to everybody. That person that reports up to that person.
But I just feel like I need to say this. But you can always say that to me. Like Jody, truly, like
I love you. I know you and I have a very open relationship. I'm speaking metaphorically, right?
I just wanted to clarify, Crockett.
We're all good. There's love here.
Again, want to make sure that that's on video.
Thank you. That's exactly where I was going with that.
Right, exactly.
But Jody, to my point, you have somebody you report to.
I do.
And I'm sure there are days when you're like, yeah, I'm not going to go to them about that. I'm going to figure that one out. And
accurate.
Right? And that's
my boss, if you're listening, that's accurate.
And I would say the same thing for you, Maria.
Yeah, I am very, Evan's incredible. If you guys, I'm sure you know Evan. She's brilliant, and, she's younger than me. And we work really well together because she knows her gold. She has tremendous aspects and perspective as a long-term St. Luke's employee. I've only been here 5 years. And so I have no problem being vulnerable and going to her and asking her questions. Same thing, she comes to me. She respects me for the work I do in OD and will ask my perspective on people. And it's a very open and trusting relationship. And that's a big piece of it, trust and respect, right?
And that's how you build resilience, is having those kind of relationships with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point.
I'm kind of curious to go back to, you guys had alluded to when COVID hit and everyone was kind of, I think I was going to use the word scramble and try to correct myself, but I feel like scramble is kind of a fair word to have used in that situation where you kind of felt like you were, the word you used was tribe. You were kind of trying to rally the tribe. You had a long meeting. You kind of let everybody talk. And as we're talking about support and maybe situations where, as we're talking about times that I might go to a person who's above me in work, times where I might try to grip and try to do something on my own. I'm curious what you both learned in situations that you were, listen, Amie, as a therapist, talking to people and trying to, understand their situations and kind of put the puzzle pieces together on maybe why X and Z are equaling one thing and A and B are equaling another. What surprised you? Because I'm sure when you got a group together, there was probably some people, I don't know how big this group was, but maybe some people that historically had been a little standoffish in your conversations and all of a sudden rose to the occasion of, we can thrive in this by doing X, Y, and Z. I'm just curious, as we talk about support, because I think it's such a big thing. I mean, this podcast is basically about, airing out your feelings and trying to find a good support system wherever you can find it, whether that's at home, whether that's with a therapist, whatever it might be for your mental health. I'm curious what you learned as Maria, as a, you're talking about organizational development. We're talking about, people that were clearly being the ones hosting those conversations. Your takeaway from those things, because I'm sure there were expectations that you had, but also moments of just like, whoa, I didn't even see that coming, maybe from that particular person. And then if we could just elaborate on support, because I think that's such a key, because sometimes there may be some answers in somebody or some great ideas in somebody that just doesn't quite know how to shake their own tree that way, that you might as a leader be able to do. So I'm just curious if in that moment you really kind of saw anything that was a surprise to you from kind of collaborating in such a big group.
So I think the concept was raised by Carol Coupland, right,
Yeah.
to bring us together. So Carol Coupland is an amazing human being, one of my favorite people at St. Luke's, and she had thrown this over the fence to Amie and I to bring together conversations around specific wellness initiatives, and didn't know what to expect on these calls.
Nope.
And I think the first call, how many people did we have?
Hundreds.
Yeah.
Hundreds. Right? And we did these calls twice a day. Like, this wasn't just once and done. This was twice a day for, how long did we do them for?
So I'm curious, so not to cut you off, but to
Yeah.
start with hundreds, realistically going into those moments, you both would have said, oh, if we get, what kind of number would you have said? Oh, this is a
50.
great number.
Yeah, we were expecting, 40, 50 people.
Yeah.
I think your first one was
surprising.
600. I think it was
could have been
600.
600 in the beginning. Yeah.
So a surprise right off the bat, which is excellent. I'm sorry, please continue. I was just
No,
curious.
and so it was really, I think in part we were both in our different worlds, OD and behavioral health, having very separate conversations, and like, well, I wonder if the two could ever marry. And it was amazing. It really did flow seamlessly. The time blew by. People were in tears. They were very raw, compassionate. And I felt like it became something that folks looked forward to, that time together.
It was their way to decompress.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we involved pastoral care. We involved a mindfulness coach. And we had lots of amazing people that kind of helped bring that together. But I would say that those discussions every day, and we started out at 650 people, and 6 months in, we were probably down closer to 100, as people kind of figured it out. But we were helping them build resilience, right, by those conversations.
I attended some of those. I would say that as an attendee, it was an equalizer in terms of the experience, meaning that it didn't matter what your role was in your organization. It didn't matter what the expectation was for you every day in your work. It was such we just were all equally there sharing. So it could be, someone in facilities who was responsible for doing deep cleans in rooms. It could be a courier. It could be an RN. It could be a physician. I found that everyone was there on an equal playing field. But the most important piece was that other people were saying things that you were also thinking, and you didn't feel alone. And there was that, back to your point,
The
Amie, social piece of it was key. And I think it gave a voice to that. It gave a voice to that piece. I do think it's important to understand what exactly is OD. What exactly is organizational development?
Yeah. So organizational development is really about the enrichment of our people, and it's not just limited to leaders. It's taking whatever it is that you want to do, or what that North Star is for you in your career, and harvesting it in individuals. So if, I'm working at a base role right now in the organization, but someday I want to, be the administrator of a hospital or be a physician, we're looking to get that person closer to that goal, whether it's through soft skill education, whether it's through specific coaching one-on-one. but really just be that Sherpa to individuals to get them to find those dreams and grab them. It's super important because not everybody has those connections in life or those people that will get them to the next stepping stone. So we're there to support that journey for them.
So I think I'm going to go back to Crockett's question, say, what did you learn about our organization in those calls? What was your takeaway from those?
Yeah, it's not what I learned, it's what was reinforced. So I remember I came from corporate in pharma, and coming to St. Luke's, I was always like, I didn't believe how nice people were. There was always a hook, like, oh, you're really, really nice. And I learned that culture is so deep here. Mm-hmm. Like, people really do come together in times of crisis versus silo. And in a time when we had to be siloed, they still fought to come together. Mm-hmm. So in these calls we would pose a question. What do you do for your own well-being? And the chat would fill with I make candles, or I run 5Ks, and I feel like those relationships were being built both in the room virtually, but in those chats. And I guarantee there were relationships that were like, oh, I didn't know they did that. You know, I was joking about, I used to paint rocks and leave them on the running trails, and people would pick them up and they could log and let me know if they've seen them. And then they had to place them somewhere else on the running trail. I got hundreds of people reaching out and saying, this is so cool, I'm going to do it too. And as I would run my path, I'd see more and more painted rocks. And it was amazing that was happening.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me this is just I have a personal example of what happened during those calls for me. I had started cooking a lot more than I normally had during the pandemic. And long story short, crock pot cooking, was my thing, was my jam, because I'm not Gordon Ramsay, right? So crock pot, that's gourmet, right, in my house. So one morning we were doing like a 6 or a 7 a.m. call, and we did really early calls, and sometimes we would do them late at night. Right before we were getting on that call, I was lifting a crock pot, an empty one, off of a fridge in the basement, dropped it, shattered all over the entire concrete. And I happened to be on the phone with somebody from Employee Wellness, and of course I told her what was going on, because she sounded like somebody broke into my house. And the next night, Amazon showed up at my house with a new crock pot.
Yeah, not surprising.
Did I
That's
mention
amazing.
I wrecked my car? I'm kidding. I didn't.
I had a private plane.
Right. Sorry to hear that, Crockett.
Yeah.
And there was a note on the thing that said, this is how you're coping. You can't go without one.
Oh, that's amazing.
It is true though. I've been with St. Luke's a little over 5 years. So we probably came around the same time.
Yeah.
And I was a little cynical about the whole St. Luke's family and this, and holy crap, it's true. It's legit. It is truly legitimate. And those calls speak to it. You mentioned earlier Tail on the Trail, that prior getting on, and there's something to be said for a healthy, and look, there's bumps everywhere. You're always going to have bumps. That's what happens. So you mentioned the grip. You're going to get in the grip. It's going to happen. But in those moments where, and I love how you said it, when we were forced to be apart, you had people fighting to still spend that time together, even if it was via, Teams. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that when you look at the health of an organization, it is, you keep going to the top till you get to the leader, right? And we know that Mr. Anderson is a huge advocate for the employees, and that's symbolic of what you're seeing in that caring space.
Yeah, for sure.
That's amazing. Now I want to go cook in a crock pot. Crock pot meals, warm and cozy. The end of this podcast, warm and cozy as well. Well, listen, that was an excellent conversation and some great in-depth analysis on the environment that you all work in. Listen, I think I'm a big sports fan. One of the things they always talk about with teams that have a lot of success, the Kansas City Chiefs, the culture that they have there, the people that you have in the building, and it goes well beyond just the actual guys in helmets you see on the screen. It's the people that are doing the work in the background and doing all those things. A support system in anything that we're doing is so important. Certainly if you're trying to build resiliency If you're facing something in your life, you guys used the word tribe earlier. I think we all, if you're lucky, you have a tribe that you can lean into when those moments get tough. And so I think that that's a great thing. And what a great bit of insight, because especially you guys are a hospital network. So I'm sure at COVID, if there was any place that should have been having a lot of conversations about how everybody was feeling and how everything was going, that was the place to do it. And so thank you for certainly sharing some inside information on that, because that was a fascinating element of this conversation. We have just wrapped up our conversation, the Just Start the Conversation podcast. So I want to thank you all for starting the conversation today. Certainly, if we're coming away from this episode with anything, that is exactly what we should be doing, whether you are a manager, a leader, whatever position you're in. Starting a conversation with somebody could certainly help, as we keep using that phrase, in the grip, maybe loosen that grip for somebody a little bit. And who knows what positive things could come on the other side of that. I think that's a really important thing to leave us here on. So Maria Wood, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today and insight and excellent points. This was very wonderful. So anytime you want to jump on board, please don't hesitate to come on board. This was exciting. So thank you.
Thank you, Crockett. Thank you, Amie and Jody.
Thanks
so
for
much
having
fun.
me.
I loved
Thank
it.
you.
And as for Amie and Jody, please continue your friendship. We had some rocky moments in this one in the middle. Some things we were teetering and tottering there, but I want to make sure we're back for the next episode after this one.
We're
for
good.
Sure. Thank
We're
you
good.
as always, friends. Okay. All right. I'm going to hold you to that.
We're a little
So
free. You've got to be free range.
Oh,
And that's
Chickens.
where we're going to wrap it up. It's the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It's brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network. For Amie Alanson Dundon, for Jody McCloud Missmer, for Maria Wood, I am Kevin Crockett. Thanks as always for checking out the Just Start the Conversation podcast.